So recently I watched a few videos about the Swedish economy and how it's performing quite well, and I'm watching a video today along those lines. This is why Sweden's Krona is outperforming the euro. So yeah, an interesting comparison. You can tell me how it feels in Sweden. Do you feel the economy is doing really well? What are your opinions on why the Krona is outperforming the euro? Yeah, let's watch this and learn.
Of Europe, Sweden's economy has had a bit of a rough time over the past few years, as rising inflation and interest rates have taken their toll. All of a sudden, however, the Nordic country appears to be emerging from this economic slump. The latest GDP massively outperformed expectations, and Sweden's economy is well placed to benefit from the coming boom in European defence spending. So in this video, we're going to look at why Sweden's economy was hit harder than most by the inflationary spike we saw over the past 2 years, and why its fortunes have apparently reversed.
Yeah, how important is defence or the defence industry to the overall Swedish economy? I've watched a few videos about Swedish defence companies, a lot of the very innovative products and equipment and machinery that they build and make. Obviously, being able to sell that to Europe is going to bring in a lot of money. How important is that industry to the overall Swedish economy?
Last week, I interviewed UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer to ask him your questions about the UK's new plans to support Ukraine and European defence initiatives in the aftermath of Trump's recent actions. Watch the video now by clicking the link in the description. So let's get straight into it. Sweden's economy has struggled more than most over the past few years. There was a steep decline in GDP at the end of 2022, and the economy slipped into recession in 2023, contracting by 0.2%. While basically all European economies struggled in 2023, this was worse than the European average.
I actually never knew that. I thought from the videos I've watched it seemed to be in a good place, but clearly that is not. Yeah, how did that feel being Swedish, being in Sweden? Did you notice that? Is it getting harder to live, the cost of living and so on? How's your quality of life?
With the EU as a whole growing by 0.2% in the same period.
Again, I guess that's the overall GDP, but what do you think caused Sweden to be in that position?
The Swedish economy then returned to growth in the first half of 2024, but the numbers weren't amazing. Year-on-year growth came in at just 0.4% in the second quarter, implying that Sweden's economy was actually still smaller than it had been in 2022. Anyway, the proximate cause of Sweden's economic downturn was inflation, which peaked at around 12% in December 2022, again higher than the European average. In a bid to get inflation under control, Sweden's central bank carried out an 18-month campaign of raising interest rates, which reached a peak of 4% in December 2023 and stayed there for around 5 months. Now, the main way this affected ordinary Swedes was the housing market. This is essentially because, unlike in countries like the UK, most Swedes have so-called floating mortgages rather than fixed-rate mortgages, which means that when interest rates rise, their mortgage costs go up almost automatically. According to data from 2023, 40% of mortgages in Sweden have interest rates fixed for 3 months or less, while just 18% have fixes longer than 3 years. Higher mortgage costs mean two things. First, a housing slump, because people don't want to buy houses when mortgages are expensive. But second, higher mortgage costs also meant a drop in disposable income for many Swedish households, which reduced consumer confidence and therefore domestic consumption. As a result, GDP contracted and unemployment rates rose, hovering between 7 and 10% over the last few years. The tide started turning in May last year, when the Riksbank finally began bringing down interest rates in response to cooling inflation.
I think that's actually quite good that they never kept it the same for too long. It's kind of been moving quite often. I think in Britain, compared to the UK, is they're very slow to react. They don't change the interest rate enough. It seems like relatively well managed, I think, in Sweden.
With inflation falling to a recent low of 0.9% this January, the Riksbank was able to cut rates to their lowest level in more than 2 years. This has given a fair bit of relief to mortgage holders, and this combination of low inflation and cheaper mortgage costs has massively helped consumer confidence. At the end of last year, household consumption was up by 0.7%, real disposable incomes were up 3.5% year on year, and in January, retail sales surged to their highest levels in 5 years. This is perhaps the main reason that growth massively outperformed expectations in the last quarter of 2024, growing by 2.4% year on year. This translates to about 0.8% quarter on quarter, the fastest growth since 2022. Now, Sweden isn't entirely out of the woods yet. Unemployment unexpectedly jumped to 9.7% in January, the highest level since the pandemic. And in February, inflation...
You said like unexpectedly, but that's like a huge jump. Like, was there any trigger for that? Or, I mean, it was quite consistent. Obviously, during the pandemic, it was a unique time, but like a huge drop here, then a huge increase there. What was the reasons for that, if you know?
Pandemic. And in February, inflation unexpectedly rose by 0.4 points, the first increase in 12 months after a series of declines, which means the Riksbank is less likely to cut rates again. Nonetheless, growth is strong, and inflation is still pretty low by recent standards, and the Swedish economy is poised to receive an extra boost from Europe's looming rearmament. For context, while Sweden has maintained an official policy of non-alignment and neutrality for much of its modern history, Sweden is still one of the world's largest arms exporters, home to big names like BAE Systems, Hägglunds and Saab. In 2014, for instance, Sweden ranked as the third largest per capita weapons exporter, trailing only Israel and Russia. Between 2009 and 2019, it was the world's 9th largest arms exporter, with total sales amounting to $14.3 billion. Although individual Swedish defence firms may not be as large as their German or French counterparts, they manufacture a diverse range of military equipment, and they account for a larger fraction of GDP. For instance, France is widely considered Europe's largest military producer, but Sweden's defence exports account for 0.6% of its GDP, compared to 0.2% of France. Sweden's industry has also fared impressively well recently. According to data from the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, Swedish arms exports have increased by 7% since 2020, in contrast to a 16% decline in French exports. Russia's war in Ukraine also...
Yeah, like Sweden taking over. That's why I did watch that video, like it was showing like all the defence organisations in Sweden, all the products they produce, and it's like very high quality, very, like innovative, as I said, like a lot, and very diverse as well, really producing everything. So for a country like, if you're comparing Sweden to France, for example, for the size of it, actually really producing a lot of great stuff.
Russia's war in Ukraine also prompted a historic policy shift, leading Sweden to join NATO last year and committing to increase its defence spending, which reached 2.2% of GDP last year, 0.2 percentage points above the current NATO target, and is set to increase to 2.4% this year. This increased defence spending is in turn strengthening the Krona, which is now the second best performing currency in the G10 year to date, after the yen. Since the end of January, it's appreciated over 5% against the dollar and around 3.5% against the euro. This is in part because the dollar is sliding against other currencies as sentiment sours against Trump's economy, but also because the krona has become a way for currency traders to bet on the European defence boom. This also explains why the European Euro Stoxx Index has outperformed its American counterpart, S&P 500, by about 12% since the start of the year, following hopes of a Ukraine-Russia peace deal alongside joint EU defence spending plans. For context, European heads of state have recently committed to big spending and stimulus programmes to unblock hundreds of billions of euros to beef up their military capabilities in the wake of Trump's abandoning of Ukraine, with the EU last week announcing that it would be borrowing another 150 billion euros at the EU level to fund further defence spending. This all bodes well for Sweden's defence industry, which is why most analysts expect the krona to strengthen by a further 2.5% against the euro by the end of the year. All in all, things are very much looking up for the Swedish economy. And while a fair bit of it has to do with its domestic defence industry, it's also tentative evidence to suggest that having a housing market that's super responsive to interest rates isn't necessarily a bad thing. Like a lot of things, this whole situation is very much in a state of flux. With Trump breaking international alliances and fundamentally changing geopolitics, the world has certainly felt more stable. Every day we're faced with weird headlines from Trump's trade war with Canada and Mexico, and
Okay, so yeah, it's cool to learn more about the housing market and how it is more responsive, as I said, more flexible compared to, as I said, in the UK, a lot of people have more fixed mortgages, so pretty cool that it can manoeuvre to suit how the market's going. But yeah, so I guess I was wondering how important the defence industry was to the economy, and it's that's a large number, 0.6% of the GDP for the defence industry. Shows Sweden's really doing well there. So tell me what you think about that. Again, I think this was talking more as if it was recorded earlier in the year. I wonder how things are now, if it's still the same, if it's still doing so well. You can tell me what you think, and tell me what you think about this video. Thanks.